When the Cuckoo called by H.D. Umbstaetter. The announcement that London music hall audiences are losing their heads and hearts over the girl with the guitar causes Mr. Seymour Gaston to smile as he looks down upon the world from his offices on the 19th floor of a New York skyscraper. Mr. Gaston is an ingenious, much-traveled young bachelor with a history and a fortune. He recently invented a folding fire escape, which also has a history and in which another fortune is said to await him. And the girl with the guitar is one of the two Zillerthaler sisters, whose permanent address is unknown and who receive 200 guineas a night for presenting their Tyrolean second sight seance. To such an extent do these mysterious maidens from the mountains hypnotize the public that they appear nightly at 4 different music halls. At the Alhambra, they open the performance at 8 o'clock, after which they are rushed by their manager in an automobile to the stage door of the second music hall, where they appear at 8:45, and so on, winding up at the aquarium at a few minutes before 10 with $1,000 in their pockets for the evening's work. When the curtain rises upon their 10-minute act, it discloses a typical Tyrolean scene: dim mountains in the background, a somber pine forest, a toy-like gabled cottage in the distance. The lights are low and the stage is empty. The orchestra begins almost inaudibly, a simple melody in the minor key. Presently, a rich voice that raises doubt in the mind of the listener as to whether it is male or female joins in. It is a song of love, a serenade. The lights grow dimmer. A new sound steals into the concerted music of voice and instruments. There are strange, bizarre chords and rippling arpeggios, and then the music is drowned in the burst of wild applause that greets the appearance of the girl with the guitar. She bows modestly, the lights go up, the rich voice is heard again in a joyous yodel, and the sister, too, appears, dressed in the picturesque attire of an alpine hunter. This artistically conceived prologue brings the audience into closer sympathy with what follows. The girl with the guitar, unheeding the applause and the demonstrations of the male portion of the audience, seats herself at the extreme right of the stage near the footlights. The sister is led by the manager along a narrow platform projecting into the center of the hall, where, after being blindfolded, she seats herself with her back to the stage. And the real performance begins, to the muted music of the orchestra and the sad, fantastic chords of the guitar. The second sight seance progresses in the time-honored way, except that no word is spoken save by the blindfolded sister, who accurately names and describes, in a clear musical voice, each article as it is borrowed from the audience and held up in silence before the footlights by the manager, some 30 feet behind her back. A gold watch with a picture of a lady on its face, a pair of pearl opera glasses, a half-crown piece with a hole in it, and so on. The blindfolded girl describes the exhibits as though they were held out before her naked eyes. She never falters, never misses, and the puzzled look that comes to every face shows how completely she has mastered her art. But it is the strange, brilliant beauty and the fantastic music of the girl with the guitar, who, seemingly unconscious of her surroundings, gazes idly across the stage, that hold the breathless attention of the audience. Music like hers has never before been heard from any instrument. It is absolutely unique. A new scale and new system of harmonies seem to have been discovered by this somber-eyed girl. It is her weird, haunting melodies that trouble the mind with strange thoughts, and the impression of mystical, occult powers at work, produced by the performance, is really traceable to this music and the mysterious personality of the girl which pervades and dominates it all. All this vividly recalls to Mr. Gaston a 10-minute drama of life in which he once played a part, and which illustrates how a man can regain his lost peace of mind by being suddenly brought to the brink of eternity. 4 years ago, while he was managing the affairs of a large American enterprise in London, a cablegram announced to him one day that his business partner in the United States had robbed him of all he possessed. Brooding over his ruined business, to which he had given 10 years of his life and sacrificed his health, his peace of mind fled, and he traveled aimlessly over the continent in search of anything that might bring him sleep and help him to bury the past. The doctors sent him to Baden-Baden, but he soon found that the conventional watering place, where one reads suffering in almost every face, proved an irritant to his insomnia. The more he came in contact with humanity, the more he felt drawn toward nature. So he started on a tour of the Black Forest. At Triberg, the picturesque little village which stands on the edge of a great waterfall high up in the dark, pine-clothed mountains, he found pleasure for a few days in visiting the quaint cottages scattered through the surrounding wilderness, where the cuckoo clocks, music boxes, and wood carvings are made that always attract foreigners. The mountaineers carry these clocks and carvings on the back for miles down the winding, perilous pathways to a public exhibition hall at Triberg, in which is kept a full line of samples for the convenience of purchasers. But the novelty of these scenes soon wore off, and on the third day after his arrival, Gaston, craving excitement, bribed the custodian of this exhibition hall to set off all the clocks and instruments at intervals of 1 second. The chorus of 1,000 cuckoos, reinforced by the patriotic rendering of Die Wachtem Rhein, the William Tell Overture and Die Lorelei, by scores of orchestrions and music boxes, delighted him, but proved demoralizing to a party of American tourists bent on doing Europe in 10 days. Mistaking their excited brandishing of alpenstocks, umbrellas, and Badekers for demonstrations of approval, the keeper kept up the performance until the inexorable schedule dragged the prospective purchasers away. They had spent the 10 minutes allotted to the Black Forest. In his wanderings and search for adventure, Gaston came one day upon what seemed like an unused trail that led higher up the mountain from an almost impenetrable jumble of rocks and pines near the waterfall. "The witch's path," exclaimed his landlord when questioned, "and whoever follows it never returns. It might have an outlet in another valley beyond," he added, but, shaking his head, there were strange stories about the witch's path, and while he could not verify them, he knew that no one of his guests who had essayed to explore it had ever come back. Sick of chattering men and women, harrowed day and night by his troubles, Gaston rejoiced in the prospect of an adventure of any kind, and while he smiled at the suggestion of danger lurking in the recesses of the witch's path, he secretly hoped there might be. Life was not a joyful possession to Seymour Gaston in those days, and he cared little whether he lived or died. So, early the following morning, with a well-provisioned knapsack on his back and an alpenstock in his hand, he set out upon the witch's path. After 10 hours of climbing, crawling, sliding, and slipping over almost impassable rocks and through impossible thickets, the trail led into a stretch of forest so dense as to completely shut out the fading daylight, and the wanderer was glad to accept as a bed the thick, endless carpet of pine needles that lay stretched out before him. The following morning he resumed his journey, and at noon discovered, high on the mountainside, what appeared like a gray toy house hidden among the rocks and pines. After another hour of tiresome climbing, he stood before a cottage built upon the very edge of an immense cleft. From far below echoed the hoarse booming of a mountain stream. His knock was answered by a short, white-bearded mountaineer with piercing gray eyes, who, upon learning that his visitor spoke German, received him hospitably with the remark that it was seldom indeed that visitors came his way to brighten the lonely lives of himself and niece, who, he added, lived by making cuckoo clocks. It required no urging on the part of Caspar Kallner, the cottager, to induce his guest to defer his return until the following day. And after supper, served by the mountaineer's attractive young niece, the tourist was equally willing to join his host in a pipe and game of écarté, while the young lady looked on and played weird airs upon her guitar. Whether it was the strange quality of her undeniable beauty and the somber mystery of her eyes, or her music, Gaston soon lost interest in the game. Although there seemed little purpose or training in her half-listless playing, the sounds seemed to hint at unfathomable things, at fancies such as Gaston supposed might visit the soul of one who had strayed from the paths of his fellowmen into an exotic, unhealthy world of his own, where strange birds sang in a dusky, scented twilight. He played recklessly, lost steadily, and was repeatedly compelled to resort to the Bank of England notes in his wallet. "You are in bad luck tonight. Shall we stop? You must be tired after your long tramp," at last suggested the host. Then, counting the money slowly and with evident pleasure, he handed to Gaston all the latter had lost. It was promptly pushed back protestingly, whereupon Kallner exclaimed, "Never! The pleasure is mine, the money is yours. It is my custom to play for stakes to lend interest to the game, but the law of hospitality forbids my keeping what I win." So Gaston returned the money to his wallet and bade his generous host and hostess good night. Kallner led him to a large, low-studded room on the upper floor, in which every article of furniture was elaborately hand-carved. "The masterpiece of my craft," exclaimed Kallner, as he pointed with pride to a mammoth cuckoo clock, fully 4 feet wide and reaching nearly to the ceiling. "But our proudest possession," he continued, as he led his guest through a tall French window upon a small veranda, "is this," pointing to a view that caused Gaston to gasp for breath. The balcony directly overhung the mighty gorge, and from the gulf of blackness far below rose the sound of the tumultuous stream, while an uncertain moon threw fantastic shadows over the towering peaks above. "Most wonderful of all," continued Kallner, "is the echo, the ghost of the gorge as it is called. You shall hear it at dawn." With that he wound up and set the big clock, adding, When the cuckoo calls, rise and come to this balcony. My niece shall play from the rocks below, and you will hear the spirit answer. Good night. As on many other weary nights, sleep refused to come to Gaston. He lay for hours listening to the gurgle of the water and hearing in it echoes of the wild music of the guitar. Towards morning, a feverish slumber came, from which he was aroused by the shrill cuckoo, cuckoo of the mechanical bird. Clad in his pajamas, he drowsily groped his way in the dusk towards the balcony. He had almost reached it when he overturned the chair which had served to keep the window half open during the night. In its outward fall, it carried down the balcony with a crash, and Gaston, horror-stricken, barely kept his balance by grasping the window casing. From the dark chasm rose the weird strains of the guitar, echoing through the gorge. The Lorelei was calling, but her notes were drowned by the shrill creaking of the iron hinges upon which the balcony now swung to and fro below Gaston, and which, like a flash, told him he had been led to a man-trap of hellish ingenuity. Instantly, horror gave way to anger, and the instinct of self-defense roused him to action. For months he had been reckless of danger, almost courted death. Now he was seized with an overpowering desire to live. He turned from the window and began to dress hurriedly when a noise attracted his attention to the cuckoo clock. Was it a hideous delusion? No, the thing was actually moving towards the center of the room. In another instant Callner appeared from an adjoining room through a door which the clock had concealed, his eyes glaring fiendishly as they rested upon the empty bed. Then, as he turned and saw Gaston, his face became a mask of absolute fright and bewilderment. For a moment only he recoiled, then flung himself upon his guest with the fury of a beast. Each instantly realized that the struggle would be to the death. Frenzied by the miscarrying of his diabolical plot, the mountaineer struggled madly, blindly, for a grip that should enable him to hurl his adversary over the mighty precipice. Foiled again and again by the agility of Gaston and forced to the defensive, he turned towards the open door to escape. As he did so, Gaston rushed upon him, pinned his arms to his sides, and pushed him inch by inch to the open window, and Caspar Callner reached the end of the witch's path. 10 minutes later, Gaston found the niece quietly preparing breakfast. She looked surprised, but when he told her that her uncle and not he had answered the Loreley's call, she asked, with naive innocence, what he meant. It was only after he had threatened to hand her over to the police at Triberg that she made this confession. She had been brought up by her uncle, who had invented the folding balcony, and who always engaged his guests in a game of cards. He invariably won because he had taught her as a child to signal, by means of notes and chords on the guitar, the cards held by his opponent. He thus learned if his guests were supplied with money, and to gain their full confidence returned all they had lost. He was enabled to set the man-trap from his room below. Although the gorge held the remains of 30 victims, it was his boast that he had never killed a man, that each had of his own free will walked into eternity. Gaston had heard enough. He did not stop for breakfast. He left Triberg the following evening, and thoughts of his business troubles no longer occupied his mind. When he returned to America, he set to work to retrieve his lost fortune, and the folding fire escape, he tells his friends, was suggested by something he saw abroad. Gaston does not claim the gift of second sight, but he knows, he says, that in the performance of the Zillerthalers, the weird strains produced by the girl with the guitar, described to her blindfolded sister the articles borrowed of the audience.